Okay. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Nazir, Daf Nun Vav. And Emir Hashem, and only with Hashem's help, if I make it through this page, we will be finishing the parak today, parak Kohen Gadol. We are starting 2 lines from the bottom on Daf Nun Hamid Beis, and the Gemara's double question that we're about to ask. The first is very sophisticated, and the second is very long, but not sophisticated. I mean, sophisticated, but not hard. First one's hard. And what we're doing is we're asking a question on the sheet of Rav Chizda. So Rav Chizda, in yesterday's shiur, on the bottom of Nun Hamid Aleph, Rav Chizda was of the opinion that in a case of Nazirus Meruba, if we have a Nazirus that is, let's say, 100 days, and the person is both a Nazir and a Mitzorah, so if it's a Nazirus Meruba and the person's also a Mitzorah, so then the days of Mitzorah, the days count as Nazirus days as well. So if you're a person who's a Nazir and on days 10 through 40, let's say, you're a Mitzorah, you don't add those days, those 30 days to the Nazirus. Your 100 days stays the same. That's the Shita of Rav Chizda. Did you have a question, Michael? I haven't even said anything yet.
That's the 2 for 1 that I was talking about yesterday.
What do you mean?
That you can overlap days.
It's only true with Nazirus Meruba. It's only true, according to Rav Chizda, it's only true with Nazirus Meruba. It's not true with Hastam Nazirus of 30 days. It's only true if the Nazirus has an extra 30 days on the other side of your Mitzorah status. Because we need your hair to grow.
That's what my
We need your hair to grow too. Just saying.
Oh,
Just kidding.
baldy hair.
Come on, that was
Good.
I don't usually get a laugh out of text. That's okay. So the Gemara is bothered by something. What?
You get the laugh, but not the flag.
I got both. It says the Gemara as follows: Nun Hamid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Masiv Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama asks a question against Rav Chizda's assumption that in a Nazirus Meruba that we count the days of Mitzorah as days of Nazirus. And the Brisa writes a scenario that is so unreasonable, but it's okay because it's stretching our limits of understanding. Listen to this. Nazir, Shahaya Tameh B'Safik, Umuchlat B'Safik. So you have a Nazir. This guy's already, he's committed enough to become a Nazir. Tough day, tough day. Hashtag tough day. He is Safik Tameh Meis and the Safik Mitzorah. So he's got 3 things, 3 ingredients in the bowl. Nazir Vadai, Tumas Meis Misafik, and Mitzorah Misafik. So says the Gemara on the top of Nun Vav Amud Aleph, Ochel B'Kodshim only la'achar shishim yom. It's going to take 60 days to clean the Tuma as it relates to Kodshim, but wine, the show say yayin umitma lemesim only la'achar mea ve'esrim yom. Okay, he has to wait 120 days. Why these various waitings? So let's just go in chunks. This is the Rivan that's here on the top where Rashi belongs. The Ramaschil Ochel B'Kodshim is about 40-50 lines of. It's beautiful. If we had an extra 15 minutes, we should learn. It's beautiful. It explains where all of the math comes from. I'm going to be very brief and terse here, but if you want to see more, you should look there. In regards to the Shishim Yom, the reason why we're okay with Kodshim on day 60 is because I will be able, over the course of 60 days, to complete my Nazirus, to remove my Mitzorah status, which is a suffix, and to remove my Tumas Mei status, which is a suffix, over the course of 60 days. Good. However, when it comes to the Isurim that are connected to Nazirus, i.e., V'shosei Yain and Mitam Mesim, that requires 120 days. Why? Well, here's how some of the math works. A man says that he's a Mitzorah, and it's day 1 of his Mitzorah. Things are going smooth, day 1. Let's even give him day 2. And then he becomes a Safek Mitzorah. Now, a Mitzorah has to get 2 haircuts, one from the beginning of his psak and one from the end of his psak. Now, if you're a Safek, listen to the question. If you're a Safek Mitzorah who needs a haircut, can you get a haircut when you're a Vadai Nazir? Safek Mitzorah, Vadai Nazir. Vadai Nazir is deraisa to get a haircut. Safek Mitzorah, Safek Mitzvah deraisa to get a haircut. So obviously not. So what happens with the Mitzorah? You have to finish the first 30 days of Mitzorah, of Nazirus, and then you can start your haircuts for Mitzorah. But says the Gemara that if in fact you really were also Tamei Meis and your Nazirus didn't count, so you have to add more days, another Nazirus. And then in fact, if your Nazirus didn't count, then your Mitzorah was done at the wrong time. You have to add yet another month. And these types of iterations continue until one will only be allowed to be involved in drinking wine and being Matam Mesim after 120 days. That is piece number one of Rami Bar Chama's question. Here's piece number two, 3 lines down. On that we have a brisa. Where do we have these rules? That in this case, where the 3 ingredients in the bowl is Nazir Vadai, Tumas Meis Misafek, and Mitzorah Misafek, where do we have this ratio that you have to quadruple your Nazirus? It's 120 days, so 30 times 4. That's only true b'Nazirus Mu'etes. That's only true when it's a 30-day, when it's a Stam Nazirus. Aval, b'Nazirus Bas Shana, if it were to be a year, so then how would the math work out? The Brisa says, "Ochel bekadshim la'achar shtei shanim." It will take 2 years to get to eating kadshim. V'shose yayin u'metam lemesim la'achar arba shanim. This Brisa takes our math equation of 1 to 4 and carries it over here as well. And the Gemara now asks its punch. It asks its question against Rav Chizda. V'isal kadaitach salkin le yomei. Remember, the reason why it's 4 years is because his Nazirus was a year long. So the Nazirus gets kicked down 4 times. It's 4 years. So that's why the Gemara says we're dealing with a 4-year thing. So what?
It could be more with 2 leap years. Yeah. Right.
I don't know what a Nazirus means when you say a year and there's an Ibra year. I don't know. I don't know.
Right, does it mean?
We don't know what it means. We don't know. Is it 12 months or is it a halachic year? I don't know. Good question. I don't know. So v'isal kadaitech, if Rav Chizda is right in his assumption from the bottom of Nun Hey Amud Aleph, if he's right that we say salkin le yome, that the days of Mitzorah status, they are also counted as days of Nazirus status, as it relates to a case of Nazirus Meruba, then tiski le b'shalosh shanim v'shloshim yom. Then it actually should not be 4 years over here. It should be 3 years and 30 days. What does that show you? It shows you that the counting is not a perfect overlap, and therefore Rav Chizda has to be wrong. And the Gemara now poses another question. The Od Masiv Rav Ashi, there is yet another question against the Shita. We're tag teaming over here, different Talmud from different generations, asking questions against the Shita of Rav Chizda. This brisa goes all the way, not only to the top of the next page, it goes almost all the way to the next Mishnah. So let's focus first on this as a brisa, and then we'll come back to what the question is in a little bit. So let's see what the brisa says. The brisa reads, we're a third of the way down on Nun Vav Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Ainli ela yemei tuma shein olin lo min aminyan. I only know that when it comes to tumas meis, that those days while a person is tamei meis during their nazirus, that they don't count. Yemei chiluto minayin. How do I know about the days when a person is most definitely a mitzorah? How do we know that those are not ola min aminyan also? Says the Gemara, it's logical. Vidinhu. What is the logic? What is the kal v'chomer? It works like this. Yemei tuma, when it comes to tumas meis, megaleach umevi korban, and v'mei chiluto, megaleach umevi korban. There is a commonality, a common denominator from becoming tamei meis and from being a definite mitzorah. The common denominators are that they get haircuts and they bring korbanos. So therefore, the Gemara says halfway down, ma yemei tumaso, just like when it comes to tumas meis, as it relates to nazirus, ein olin lo min aminyan, that the days that the person is tamei meis don't count as days toward his count for nazirus. Therefore, af yemei chiluto, ein olin lo min aminyan. The halacha seems to be the same as it relates to tumas hameis on the one side and yemei chiluto, the definite days of being a mitzorah on the other. It seems to be crystal clear that it should be that these days don't count. Says the Gemara, says the Brisa, lo, I disagree with you. Imamris, there's a difference between the world of tumas meis and the world of yemei chiluto, of being a mitzorah. Im amris bimei tumaso, when it comes to the days of tuma, we know that the halacha is shekein mevatel b'henas hakodmin. We know that as it relates to tumas meis and its intersection with nazirus, that sometimes, many times, according to some of the Tanaim, the whole time, it uproots your previously successfully kept days of nazirus. But Tomar, would you say bimei chiluta when we talk about mitzorah? There she'ein mevatel b'henas hakodmin. So the Gemara says, you're trying to tell me that tumas hameis and tumas hamitzorah is the same and that their days don't count as part of the days of the minyan of nazirus. Well, the Gemara says that there are differences between Tumas Meis and Tumas Metzora, and this is one of them, that when it comes to Tumas Meis, it uproots previously successfully kept days of Nazirus. Masha Einkein, when it comes to Yemei Chiluto, that's not the case. So Amris Kal V'chomer, we would say that there's actually still a Kal V'chomer here. Uman Nazir Bekever, when a person accepts Nazirus upon them while they're in a cemetery. We learned about this case much earlier in the Masechta. His hair is really fit to be cut, even though right now he's kind of stuck because he's a Nazir Bekever. And there we said that those days are Ein Olden Lo Min Haminyan. He never had a chance to really start his Nazirus. He was standing in the Beis HaKvaros and he never left. But when it comes to the days of the Metzora, that his hair is not really fit to cut, all the more so when it comes to this case as well, by Yemei Chiluto. So says the Gemara, I only know that that's true in regards to definite cases of Metzora. What about Yemei Sifro Minayin? What about the days between the two haircuts when he's simply doing his Yemei Sfira, he's counting? Says the Gemara, here too, Vidinhu. And the Brisa continues for another 10 or 15 lines. On the top of Nunvavim Beis, the Gemara makes an equation between Yemei Chiluto and Yemei Sifra, the days where he is, where it's determined that he's a Metzora, and the days of his Sfira between haircuts. Ma Yemei Chiluto ta'un tiglachas. Just like the Yemei Chiluto require a haircut, Af Yemei Sifro, so at the beginning and the end, he'll get haircuts. And just like the days when he's most definitely a Metzora, those days don't count to be part of the Nazirus. Af Yemei Sifro, the same is true for the days that he's counting. We'll come back to this soon because this plays into part of the question against Rav Chizda. Yachol Af Yemei Heskero. What about days of quarantine? These are days where the Kohen tells this person, we're not sure what's going on with you. We need to give you a week in quarantine and let's see how things go. Says the Gemara, what would then be the din with Hesker? Would we say that when a person's in quarantine, those days count for Yemei Nazir or not? Says the Gemara, V'hadin Yachal Af Yemei Hesker, okay? Says the Gemara, V'hadin no saying. Logic would indicate the following. Chalut B'tamei Mishkav U'Moshav. When a person is definitely a Metzora, so he's Metame Mishkav U'Moshav. That means anything he sits on becomes Tameh. And says the Gemara, the same is true. V'yimei Heskero also Metame Mishkav U'Moshav. That's a chiddush. That even though we're not yet sure what your Tuma status is, you're in Hesger, you're in quarantine. Afal Pikein, if you sit down on a mattress, the mattress becomes Tameh. So Im Lamadet, if you learn V'yimei Chiluto She'ein Olan Lo Min Haminyan, perhaps we would say Yimei Heskero Ein Olan Lo Min Haminyan. We would say that neither of these days should count, even the Yemei Chiluto. To this, the Gemara says, Amris, lo, that's not correct. Your comparison between the Yemei Chiluto and the Yemei Heskero, the days where a person is definitely a Metzora, versus the previous days where we weren't sure, they're really not the same. What's the distinction that the Gemara highlights? Amris lo, the Gemara says 8 lines down that there's really nothing to compare here. Because im Amris b'mei chiluto, shekein chiluto taun tiglachas umevi korban lefichach ein olin. When it comes to the days when a person is most definitely a Metzora, in such a case, he requires a haircut and he brings a korban. Therefore, his days don't count as part of the Nazirus days. However, Tomar b'mei heskero, could you say the same thing with quarantine days? She'ein taun tiglachas ve'ein umevi korban lefichach yalu leminyan. And that's what the Brisa concludes. Mikan amru yemei sifro v'yemei gemaro ein olam min haminyan aval yemei hazav ve'azav ve'hesker shel metzora harei elu olin lo. That's the end of the Brisa. This last piece indicated that there's a difference between 2 of the 3 parts of metzora: the yemei sifro and the yemei gemaro, the days when he's counting his in-between haircuts, and the days where he's closing out his Metzora with the Korbanos, whatever he's doing, those days are not Ola the Minyan. However, the case of Hezger, when one is in quarantine, those days do count in the Minyan. Now here, says the Gemara, is our second powerful question against the Shita of Rav Chizda. Katani Mihas, what did we learn in our Brisa? the brisa that we just saw. Here's the quote that we saw in our brisa. We're about a third of the way down on Nun Vav Amud Beis. Lo, our brisa said that your comparison is not true because we said in regards to the differences between tumas meis and tumas mitzora that by tumas meis that tumas is mevatel as hakodman, it uproots previously successfully kept days of nazirus. But we said tomar b'mei chiluto that that's not true. Now the Gemara analyzes that case. B'mai, ilema ben nazirus mu'etes, had that case been a case of nazirus mu'etes, well, of course those days are going to be problematic because haba'inan gidul seyar. No matter what you do, we need 30 days of uncut hair. So that case in the brisa cannot be talking about a regular nazirus of 30 days here labeled as nazirus mu'etes. Elalav, it must be that we're talking about nazirus meruba. We're talking about a day of days of nazirus meruba. V'katani she'ein ola lo min haminyan, and we see in our brisa that these days are not olalo min haminyan. That's exactly against Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda on the bottom of Nun Hamad Aleph told us that when we're talking about a case where a person is both a Nazir and a Mitzora, and we're talking about a case of Nazirus Meruba when we have many, many, many days of Nazirus, that the days of Mitzora count as Nazirus days. Says this Brisa, no, they don't. No, they don't. And therefore, says the Gemara Alma Lo Salkanle, that these days in fact don't count. Shmami, no, we reject the Shita of Rav Chizda, and let's just review the last blot and a half in 30 seconds. We were under the assumption from Rav Chizda that when a person is both a Mitzora and a Nazir, and we're dealing with a Nazirus that's very lengthy, that the days that he's a Mitzora during his Nazirus period count as part of those days. And therefore, if you have 100-day Nazirus, you could finish with 100-day Nazirus and have Mitzora in the middle. The Gemara says, with multiple reasons, we reject the sheet of Rav Chizda. Therefore, according to the conclusion of our Gemara, the person's lengthy Nazirus of 100 days would be 100 days plus however long he was a Mitzora. It's a huge nafkamina in Midoraisa because he's not done with his Nazirus yet. And that is what we seem to hold in our Gemara. We reject the shita of Rav Chizda. And the rest is much easier. The new Mishnah says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Eliezer says in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua. Often, I know myself, I glance over these names, but these names we have to pay attention to because they're going to be the discussion of our Gemara. What did he say? That if a tuma is the type of tuma that would make a Nazir have to shave his head, if you're that kind of tameh and you walk into the Beis HaMikdash, chayav aleh al bias mikdash. The halachos of what makes a Nazir need to shave are the same halachos for harabais, for bias HaMikdash. Harabais is the wrong language. For bias HaMikdash, going into the Mikdash. And conversely, and seemingly extraneously, the flip side. If there's a type of tuma that doesn't bring about hiskalchos, a haircut in regards to a Nazir, in that case, ein chayav aleh al bias mikdash. In such a case, if a person would walk into the Mikdash with that kind of tuma, so then that would not trigger the isser.
So you're talking about a tuma that's a shiur, and then you're talking about a tuma that is mace?
We learned two Mishnayos, the two previous Mishnayos that we learned. One was about the things that a person would have to shave on. You're carrying a skeleton if you're a Nazir, right?
Oh, okay.
That Mishnah. Versus the next Mishnah, which says you don't have to shave Eretz Ha'amim, and you touch Kalim that touched a mace. All of those make you tameh to a degree, but not enough to trigger the isser of walking into the Makom HaMikdash. So we have these two categories. Like if you flip back into the Mishnayos, into the earlier Nuns, so the Mishnah that we have, for example, on Nun Daled, which one is that? On Nun Daled Amud Aleph, that's the lenient Mishnah. And the Mishnah that's earlier on Mem Tes, I think it is. Yeah, the Mishnah on Mem Tes is the one that would be all the Isurim of the Nazir that would make him not only a Nazir, but would also make it a Nisr Deraisa to walk into the Beis HaMikdash. So those two Mishnayos, you could say those are the Mishnayos about Nazirus. It's true, but they're also the same, seemingly the same exact halachos about Bias HaMikdash. Sure. Identical. That's what the Gemara says over here. But the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, whatever type of tuma makes a Nazir has to shave, whatever those are, if you're that kind of tameh and you walk into the Makom HaMikdash, chayav aleh. That's a big problem. So that means I'm a regular Yisrael. I'm a regular guy. I just want to go bring a korban. So I walk in and I'm tameh because I carried a skeleton. I'm a doctor. I work with cadavers. You're chayav. Why? Because that tumah is the same tumah that would have made a Nazir shave his head. Okay. That's shita number one in the Mishnah. Shita number two is Amar Reb Meir, lo tehei zu kala min hasheretz. Don't get so lenient. The halachos here are not a dead-on match to the world of Nazir and Beis HaMikdash. There is a difference. We are not as lenient as the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, the Gemara is bothered by seemingly just the names of this Mishnah, and that's how the Gemara opens halfway down on Vav Amud Beis. Let's start with this fascinating Gemara about analyzing how we quote people's names. Says the Gemara of Rabbi Eliezer, Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua Gamar La. Is it in fact true that Rabbi Eliezer, as it appears in our Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua, it seems that he's quoting clearly and simply from Rabbi Yehoshua. But the Gemara asks, that's not correct. The history is not correct. The Hamishum Rabbi Yehoshua Bar Mamel Gamar La. It actually seems that this din is not from Rabbi Yehoshua, who was person one. It was a different person, Rabbi Yehoshua Bar Mamel, who really Rabbi Eliezer is quoting from. So why does our Mishnah only quote Rabbi Eliezer in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua? That's the wrong person. It should be Rabbi Eliezer in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua Bar Mamel. After all, Tanya, the Brisa writes, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Shalachti la'ardiskaya. When I went to this particular city, Matzasias Rabbi Yehoshua ben Peser Rosh. That was his name. His father's name was Peser Rosh. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Peser Rosh, Shayoshe v'dan lifnei Rabbi Meir b'halacha. He was sitting in front of Rabbi Meir in halacha. And what did he say? What did Rabbi Yehoshua ben Peser Rosh say in front of Rabbi Meir? He said what our Mishnah says, which is what Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Meir. Any type of tuma that would make a nazir tameh enough to shave his head, that same exact tuma would be the problematic kind of tuma that a person would violate if they walked into the Makom HaMikdash. And on the flip side, same language as our Mishnah, and if it's a type of nazirus, that's a lower level of tuma for the nazir that may require shlishi v'shvi b'hazah, but it doesn't actually make him shave his head. That's not the Yisur D'Oraisa of walking into the Beis HaMikdash. Amar Lo, Rabbi Meir was sitting there, and he says, Al tehezu kala misharetz. Don't get more lenient. The same machlokes in our Mishnah. Same thing. But it's the same as Rabbi Meir. The problem, yeah, it is. Amar Lo, yeah. Because as he said, he was... Exactly. Yeah, so far it's a perfect match so far. It seems to be spot on. This Brisa that we're quoting in the Gemara is just another version of the same story of our Mishnah. So then the Gemara says, Amarti Lo, meaning Rabbi Eliezer, says back to Rabbi Meir. I'm sorry, it's actually not. It's actually Rabbi Yehoshua ben Peser Rosh who says back to Rabbi Meir, Amarti Lo, Klumata Baki Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel. Don't you know Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel? They're playing Jewish geography, but in regards to learning, right? Amar Lo Hein, I know him. He says, Kach Amar Li Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel, Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua. Both names. What did he say? So what do we see from over here? We see that the halacha that there's an overlap in the halachos of what makes a nazir shave his head and what violates the Yisur Bias Mikdash when you're tameh are the same. Heve, when we look into this, says the Gemara, Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel Gamirla, it seems to be that the original Mari Makom was not Rabbi Yehoshua, but was rather Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel. So why does our Mishnah not say the right names? It says the generation who Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel learned from. It says that Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel learned from Rabbi Yehoshua, but why does our Mishnah omit Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel's name? Amru, the Gemara says 3-4 lines before the wide lines. The Gemara now teaches a general principle about quoting names when we're learning. Amru says the Gemara, Shma Mina, we learn the following principle. Kol Shmaitis, any sugya that you're learning, Demis Amra, the Beit Lasa, which has 3 generations of names. Our Mishnah would be an example. It is Rabbi Eliezer, who learned from Rabbi Yehoshua bar Mamel, who learned from Rabbi Yehoshua. Kadmoi uvasroi amrinan, we quote the first and the third, but mitzioi, the middle generation, lo amrinan. That's so fascinating. I don't know why I have to look into the Rishonim as to why that's the case, but let's move on. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, we have this idea already taught to us. Afana nami tanina. We have this, we already learned this principle in the Mishnayos in Peah. Amar Nachum halavlar. Nachum halavlar, halavlar is a sofer. Kach mekublani mi Rab Meisha, shekibel me Abba, shekibel mina zugos, shekiblu mina neviim, halacha lamosh mi Sinai. He quoted a whole lot of people. He skipped a generation that we'll soon see. What was the halacha that was taught? Bizoreya sheves v'chardal, when a person is planting either dill or mustard seeds, bishnai mushloshim makomos, and they're planted in 2 or 3 different places. So what does the Gemara say? The Brisa says, sheno sein pe'ami kol echad ve'echad. Oh, who was omitted from this long list? V'ilu Yehoshua v'kalev lo kachashiv. We omitted one of the generations, Shema Mina, that it is acceptable and normative for us to skip over generation 2 when we're quoting a lot of different names. Let's learn one more Mishnah and quick Gemara to finish off the parak. The last Mishnah of the parak of Kohen Gadol says as follows: Amar Rabbi Akiva, Danti lifnei Rabbi Eliezer. I made the following logical comment in front of Rabbi Eliezer. Ma'im etzem kiseora she'enu metame adam be'ohel. We know that if there's a piece of bone that is the size of a pearl of barley, we know that it is not metame be'ohel, too small. Ha-nazir megaleach al maga'o ve'al masa'o. But at the same time that it's too small for that, when it comes to maga and masa, that's full-fledged tuma, and a nazir would even shave his head for that. Revi'is dam shu metame adam be'ohel. When it comes to revi'is of dam, where that does have enough status for tumas ohel, Eino din sheyehei hanazir megalech al magao ve'al masa'ah. Beautiful kal v'chomer. If it's true that etzem kiseora is not metame be'ohel but does create tumas nazir, then revi'is dam, which is metame be'ohel, all the more so it should have magao masa. Omar li mazeh akiva. What are you talking about? Ein danin kan mikal v'chomer. We cannot learn a kal v'chomer from here. We don't yet know exactly what this means. We'll analyze in the Gemara. When I brought this same idea in front of Rabbi Yoshua, Amar li Yafe Amris, you're correct. What you said is correct, but Elakain Amru halacha. But what you said is only true because it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, not because of your logic. Your logic falls short. Your logic is irrelevant because we have halacha l'Moshe Sinai. But we don't know which one is the halacha l'Moshe Sinai yet, and that's what the Gemara is going to analyze. Top of an Zayin Amad Aleph, heading to the end of the Perki Boilahu. The question was raised in the base medrash. Etzem kiseora halacha. Do we say that the din of etzem kiseora, which is not metame be'ohel, but is metame b'maga uvamasa, is that halacha l'Moshe Sinai? V'revi'is dam kal v'chomer, and revi'is dam is learned out from a kal v'chomer, and ve'ein danan kal v'chomer mehalacha. But really, it was an inappropriate comparison because you can't make a kal v'chomer from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. O Dilma, or perhaps were things reversed. Perhaps it was revi'is dam halacha, that the din of revi'is dam being a halacha that it is metame be'ohel, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Ve'etzem kiseora kal v'chomer, and the din that a piece of bone the size of a pearl of barley would have been true only because of a kal v'chomer. Ve'ein danan kal v'chomer mehalacha. So which one is it? Which one's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai? Which one was the attempted kal v'chomer? The Gemara responds to conclude the parak, Tashma, etzem kiseora halacha. The din of etzem kiseora is quoted in our Mishnah that it is metame be'ohel, that it is not metame be'ohel, but it is metame be'maga uvamasa. That's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Revi'is dam kal v'chomer. The din of revi'is dam is tried to be learned from a kal v'chomer, but ve'ein done in kal v'chomer me'alacha. But we're not allowed to extrapolate from a kal v'chomer into teaching us anything new. So that's what the Gemara concludes. We'll stop right here. Hadran alach Kohen Gadol. We should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Wishing you all a beautiful night.